John Bewley, Scott Clark, Bill Fowler, Scott Evans, Mark Dahlquist, Mike Perduto, James Short, Tom Sewell, Brian Barnhill. This is RealTuners Radio.
Good evening, everybody. After a one-week hiatus, RealTuners Radio is back online. Biggest news of the week, our own Bill Fowler of Big Hat Racing takes home a class win at Rocky Mountain Race Week 2020. Bill competed in and finished the grueling week-long event well ahead of anybody else in his class. Thanks for tuning in. Now let's get back to work on that project and get the show going. Welcome, everybody, to RealTuners Radio. Oh, hola, everybody. How's it going? Hope everyone had a good couple of weeks. We had a couple of weeks. We had a week off, actually. It's been kind of a crazy busy week. Special thanks to everybody that showed up for our class in Palm Bay, Florida this last weekend. I just got home last night after a drive. We decided to drive that event. We were lucky to be able to sneak that one in before the state decided to start closing everything down again due to what they call a second wave of coronavirus outbreak. Anyway, it was a good time. We had, we had one car over 1,600 wheel horsepower, one car over 1,500 wheel horsepower, handful of cars in the 600, 700, 800 horsepower range. It was a good time. We had lots of fun. I'm going to go ahead and bring in the dudes. Dudes, how's it going?
Dude.
Hello. It's going good, but you can't see us on anything because it's a black screen right now.
Oh, hey. People bitching about that, I bet.
Not yet, other than us.
Yeah, I got it on Barnhill now. We're good to go. Sorry. I
think there was a lot of success for James and Mike Perduto this last week, is what I think is also very important.
But we didn't win a week-long race.
Where is Killer James?
Yeah, Killer James. Where's Killer James?
He's probably on the dynos still.
Right? Don't make me show that slide of Killer James. Killer James Short. So anyway, welcome back, Mr. Fowler. You did good. We'll talk about Mr. Perduto and his buddy William Tetro did real good. Bewley and Blake did real good this last week with the Hashynskis. But man, we got to hear the story. I mean, I don't, unless there's other news someone wants to talk about first, I get right to Rocky Mountain Race Week. I
want to know how. Not only did he win, did I read right? He was a full second faster than his second place car.
Yeah. All I can do is thank the people, the other hosts that are on this call, because I got a lot of help from Scott Clark and from Scott Evans and everybody, because when we arrived at Bandimere, our tune was so lost, I could literally not drive the car.
That was pretty hilarious.
The trailer attached. I mean, it was horrific. It had this hole where it would go dead lean from, 1,800 RPM to 3,800 RPM. So the way I got it to the track was just stabbing and steering. And on the cold, street radials, it would just light them up. So everybody thought I was being some kind of jerk trying to do burnouts with a trailer driving to the track. And it was all I could do to just get it there, because we just needed to get there and get through tech and do everything else. And I have to say that for people that are listening that either were in attendance or have done endurance drag races before, Matt Frost and June Allison, Adam Dory, and the whole crew that had this thing, they had the best tech-in of any of these events I have ever been to, and I have been to a lot.
That's awesome.
This really went well. They also had the NHRA guys were fully on point. And they had told us in advance. So it was like they checked everything. I learned when I was with Scott Evans at Irwindale a week before this that my Hans device had timed out on the SFI sticker. It's like, Jesus, when was the last time you looked at that? But they looked at everything. I mean, everything. They looked at my shoes. They looked at my gloves. They looked at my fireproof head sock. I mean, they looked at frickin' everything. And as slow as we went, that was kind of amusing. I put in a belly pan for the event because they said you need to have a diaper or a belly pan if you were going to, run 9 seconds or better. which turned out to be not a problem at Vandermeer. But anyway, the event went off amazingly well. There were 238 cars that actually cleared tech and went, which, by the way, is slightly more than cleared tech and went at another big event that's out there recently. And it was just a really great show. It's an amazing deal. The thing that I think was maybe the best was every track we went through had full spectator stands. I mean, Kearney, they said it was the largest crowd ever at Kearney. At Pueblo, they sold out the spectator part of it, never mind the entrant part. So it was cool to see people coming out for whatever kind of drag racing we call this, but it was really neat to see all those people in the stands. At Kearney, you drive back, the entire return road is lined with people, and I'm talking from the turnout practically. So it was really cool.
I am so happy to hear that event went well for Matt in June, because man, look, I mean, Drag Week, is that really going to happen? I have doubts. And you know, Midwest, the Midwest, the new version of this event had to get canceled as well. So I mean, I can't imagine the stuff Matt and June were up against, but man, kudos to them. 220 plus cars showed up for that event.
Yeah, literally, we were driving there and hearing about all the people having to drop out, and you know, where the governor's going to shut stuff down again. And the event came off really, really well. I ran into people at gas stations all the way across the country back to California who were saying they'd watched it on the live feed or done all that sort of stuff, and were just stoked to see a car that had been there, let alone one covered with bugs that looks like it's just been beat up in a parking lot for a week, which is pretty much what it did. But yeah, it was a great event. And, you know, you have to, you know, hats off to Hot Rod for inventing this class of racing and doing this. And now that everybody's kind of relaxed a little bit, there can be multiple events. It's a good thing for the sport. It's a good thing for what everybody does, even though it's a tiny, tiny little niche. But as always, now that I'm back, it's nice to, you look back and think, oh, that was one of the coolest things ever. Once again, while you're doing it, it's like, am I the stupidest
It sucks
guy on
while
earth?
you're doing it. Adventures are only fun when you're not having them, right?
Yeah. Oh, God.
The best stories come from some of the shittiest, like at the moment
situations. That's totally this event, man. Bill was.
So I'm
Bill,
taking
there were
the
a
car
couple
to
times.
Donuts on Saturday. It's got a shifting problem right now. Literally, I was at the Conoco station outside Vandermeer filling up before going to the track for the last day, and it wouldn't go into park. It's like, what the fuck is up with that? And then went up, and so basically we just flipped the tires and pulled the exhaust, and I made a hit right out of the gate because it's like, well, we had a little cushion. So I just made a hit. And then I'm getting it on the trailer, and I get it on a little crooked. By the way, we were the last ones out of the parking lot because we decided to go out to steak dinner before the awards thing. But I tried to back it up a little bit, recenter it on the trailer. It wouldn't back up because the shifters. So I literally can't get the car off the trailer right now. So I'm driving back to my house with it on the trailer. I had a spare tire come off of the trailer itself almost. I caught it in the mirrors before it broke off and killed people. I broke a tie-down strap on the drive. We broke all kind of shit on this trip because the roads were incredibly rough. Everything was under construction. I have to give Matt kudos for the route. We never turned a tire on an interstate the entire time. And in my book, that's a good thing because it was all 2 lanes through cool little towns and places I'd never seen before.
Crazy good views, always great drives on Rocky Mountain Race Week. Totally worth doing if you're into that.
On the other hand, we had both the bracketed, the first day, they took us up through Loveland Basin. For people who know Colorado, that's where ski area is. And then on the last day from Pueblo, we took a little jog up toward Pikes Peak. So we cleared close to 11,000 feet on both. And it turns out my car hates altitude with a passion. We'll discuss that more when we talk about fuel systems and heating in a minute. But nevertheless, the drives were awesome. It was beautiful. We had a chance to enjoy them because we had to stop every 50 miles and let the fuel cool down. So we got to enjoy it more than most. But it's a great event. And anybody who's thinking about doing one of these events, and you might not want to make the big pull to the Midwest or the East Coast, and you're more Rocky Mountains-ish, Next year, Matt says it's going to go north. No one knows what that means, but what do they say? Winter is coming, so it's going to be interesting. So yeah, great, just a wonderful event. Can't say enough good things.
That's badass. I think the fact you broke so much stuff goes to what Scott said earlier about this is grueling racing, man. This isn't showing up to the racetrack, making a couple passes, going home.
Sucks. It sucks. There were a couple times he called me and he was really frustrated. Like, I mean, I never heard quit in his voice or anything yet. But again, Bill is a drag week veteran since the very first one. And I mean, it was tough. I just thought the whole time, I'm like, man, I know you're frustrated. I know you're grumpy. But in a week, in 2 weeks, this will be cool. Just you're doing fine. And I didn't have to tell him to stick it out. He wasn't giving up easy. But damn, there were some frustrating times. Like, dude, we got here. I thought the car might be a few % off on fuel. Nah, the fucking thing wouldn't run basically at all. It would start barely. And we had to dick around with the barometric correction table, which is a damn good thing. But it was pretty cool because he stopped having to mess with that so much after he covered the whole range of altitudes. So, like... at least I didn't hear any complaints back. He must have either took it and ran with it or it worked, but whatever. It was good to hear.
Well, so we got down off the mountain. So that was cool. And then on the way to Kearney, we took the full 2 days. And when I say 2 days, we got to the track at Kearney at 6 o'clock. Okay. The track was going to close at 10. We arrived at 6. They'd opened it at 3. We got there at 6 and had to unpack the car, but that was because we cracked a wheel. So we were having to stop and put air on the tire every 50 miles for a while. And we finally just stayed overnight in Sterling, which nobody will know where Sterling is, but it's right on the border between Colorado and Nebraska. And then we found a little shop and they couldn't find any leak in the tire. So while they were doing the bubble test stuff, it leaked onto the wheel and bubble air was coming out between the face of the wheel and the hoop. It's like, what the hell is that? So we pull the tire off and there's a radial crack where the 2 hoop pieces have been welded together all the way around the wheel. It's like, well, this sucks. So we used a combination of JB weld and tire sealant so we could limp it the rest of the way into Kearney the next day. And then I had brought my skinnies, 17-inch welds with little tires, but they didn't actually fit the car. So we had to modify the front of the fender wells in the pits. So we did that. And then, so we ended up doing the rest of the trip. If anybody saw the pictures, on a trailer wheel, a 15.6, literally white trailer wheel. So it's all part of the fun.
So how many bags of ice did it take to get you from point A to point B at what time this was all said and done?
I believe the number is 28.
So for those wondering what the hell I just said, at one point, Bill had to have bags of ice on and around his gas tank to keep the fuel from overheating and boiling in the tank to keep him on the road.
Yeah, so we were literally every time we'd stop for fuel, which is not infrequently with a 600 cubic inch big block that's running a tad fat, which I left it that way because the motor never got overheated, never ran hot, never did anything. But you could tell when the fuel began to get hot because the fuel pressure would start to dive and the AFRs would get loopy. And then it's like, okay, time to pull over. So we had to do that. In the mountains, we just had to stop and wait 30 minutes at a time to let everything cool off. And then we could drive for another few miles on the uphills. So it was really entertaining for everybody else to watch us.
A lot of people don't understand that altitude makes things boil faster, right? It lowers their boiling point, and so it causes the fueling to turn to vapor, and then you end up with cavitation and a whole bunch of problems. And most people who experience it, it's because they have to return a whole bunch of extra fuel to the tank because they got a big pump because they're making big power, but when they're just cruising around, they don't need the whole pump and they've got it running the whole time wide open.
Yeah, so we run a big pump, we have a controller on it, but to be frank, that was a fail in this circumstance, in this environment. So we're going to be revisiting the fuel system and looking at a small pump to run the car on for driving around.
Bill, I know you're not home yet and you're in your truck, but just so you know, there's people on Facebook.
Big pump.
Yeah, Bill's drives are a bad signal area.
Bill's driving through a bad signal area. Bill, I know you can probably hear me, and you're driving home. When you get home, we got people all over Facebook who apparently met you or saw you on Rocky Mountain Race Week. A gentleman by the name of Bill Armstrong, Casey Ediger, I believe, and Chad Bartling. So yeah, there were people out there. I mean, we have listeners that were on this race. That's cool as shit, man. That makes me happy.
Yeah, there were a ton of people that are on the show. I'll be home in 5 minutes, and then this will all go away, so I won't talk anymore.
No,
But
you're good.
yeah.
You're good.
Well, it's believe me, it's going to come and go in this little section of town. But yeah, Bill Armstrong has that super cool twin turbo 427 small block Ford Fairlane with a stick. Man, is that a cool car? And he had some great insight on, and we'll talk about that more when I get home. And I met a ton of people who have been to Real.
Bill, we're losing you. We're going to have to get you when you get back. I think he's gone. Mark, Scott, you got anything else till you get
classes?
Well, hey, Bill.
And a ton
Hey,
of
Bill.
people who listen to the podcast. So audience.
Hey, Bill.
Please talk. Well, I can't.
Yeah,
You're good.
we're gonna let Mike tell us about his experience with the Nitrous car, because this is like, the whole fairy tale thing, especially when you consider it's Nitrous. This isn't an NA motor or anything. This is open up the bottle and let her eat and hope that you don't make a bunch of ashtrays.
The old theory of spray and pray and see what happens. So yeah, we took the 69 out this weekend. It's for those that don't know, it's a Pat Musey built 632 and a 69 Camaro. It's a Outlaw 10.5 style build. Still has factory front frame on the rail in the back or in the front of the car. We put William Tetra in the driver's seat. William, the one that owns that pretty bluish green. If I don't call it Montego blue, he'll probably kill me next time I see him. RX-7. Never been in a big tire car before. Never been in a nitrous car before. Never been in a wheelie bar car before. It was an all-new motor combination for us, and all-new chassis for us. We went out and tested, I want to say a week before the race Thursday, we went out and had a private test session. I think we made 2 or 3 motor hits, and then he finally started bringing kits on. And we were fighting some height issues. The car was built for a taller driver. So every time he would let go of the button, the car his foot would come off the gas pedal and I should shut off. We rectified that. Tim at Coast Chassis modified the gas pedal and gave us a little more throw on the pedal. We went out last Friday night, made 2 nitrous passes in the car, finally turned the second kit on for the first time. Will got to see what real horsepower is like, unlike that turbo stuff. Sorry, I like the turbo stuff too. I have to throw that in there. And we went to Saturday night, local cash days race, considering a test session. First time putting Will in the car next to somebody, the staging procedure changes. He's still looking for a bump button that the nitrous car doesn't have. He fought a couple issues. First pass, our test pass, his helmet rose up on him. He had to lift. So we went into the first round without a full nitrous pass night of the race and ended up round by round by round and ended up in the winner's circle for the night. Another one of those, I got to thank a lot of the guys on here as well. It has a foolproof performance camshaft in it. Yes, John Bewley, even though he doesn't love us, didn't come on tonight, makes camshafts for things other than LS and turbo cars. And just general help from the guys on here and help from Tim at Coast Chassis came through clutch and literally threw a tune-up in the chassis and said, hey, I hope this works. And we were driving down a radial prep track on 17-inch wide slicks like it didn't even matter. Wish we had time slips, wish we could see. Unfortunately, we did not get time slips for the night. But we'll be back out testing here soon and see what the thing does. But super cool to be in the winner's circle. First time out with a new car, first time out with a new driver, first time out with new everything.
Congratulations on that, because say what you want, that's not the easiest thing to do.
No, it's not, and it was a lot of luck. Let's put it that way. I'd love to, I make fun of Will. Will's a hell of a driver. He fell right into that seat and got comfortable. And one of the local greats in the area we're having arguments right now is because it's an instant green race at this cash days, and I could show you I don't know if I can send it over to Scott Evans and you guys could get in on the argument too, but we're having a bet over who treed who. I mean, Will was on his game, first time in the car, and it's an argument over who treed who with one of the quote unquote local legends. So we're super pumped. Can't wait to go into more and see where we end up. What is Scott Evans talking? Oh, Scott, explain to us what you're talking about over here in boiling gas and adding lead.
Oh, so there's basically gasoline boiling point. Can be anywhere from 100 degrees to 400 degrees, depending on a lot of factors. Today's gasoline blends that we get are mandated that they have a specific reaction point for boiling, that they have to be, and I can't remember what the term's called, but it's basically the vapor pressure that's caused when they subject the fuel to a certain temperature and a certain atmospheric condition. And they have to meet a certain amount. And gasoline now is at a point where it doesn't boil mostly until about 185 degrees Fahrenheit for pump gas. The more octane you have, the higher that boiling point ends up being, as well as adding lead to it can also raise that boiling point. While Bill was on the thing, I said, hey, if you got a way to raise the octane or add some lead, that'll help with it some. It may not fix it completely, but it might get you a little more time before you have to chill it back down. And he had some 101 octane fuel there, and adding a couple gallons of that brings up the octane a little bit, will help some with that boiling point and making it go a little further.
Interesting.
I'd like to take a commercial break and show, if my screen is up, these coasters that one of our listeners sent me, Kevin Huselbus. Made these solid wood coasters that are just gorgeous, and Kevin sent them to me as a thank you. I don't even remember what I did, but it was really nice of him just to shout out there.
I like it a lot. Is it bad that Tetra's already up in the messengers asking when he can get a third kit for high gear?
I'd like to ask Barnhill. Barnhill, would you like to talk a little bit about, well, you and Evans, would you like to talk a little bit about VE and how that works?
Yeah, I mean, how would you like to talk about VE tonight in math? How's math?
Fucking math. Math is right. Yeah, so VE is versus your manifold. It's an efficiency of how good your engine is at filling itself, not how good your turbo is at giving it more air to be able to fill itself with. Yeah, I have gone over the math a million times with it, but PV equals NRT. If it's versus atmosphere, then a boosted car would have 200% VE, and we just know that's not right. So I can go on a rant if you want, but
are these feel free. I want to hear a Barnhill rant. Well, are these the same people that post that if you don't tune in Lambda, you don't know what you're doing?
No,
pretty much.
Well, there's a little bit of a story behind this, because someone posted in the RealTuners Facebook page today about,
and two other places.
Yeah, and the argument's going on. It's like VE is a simple math model. Now, if you're having to do other things to get your pulse width or whatever right, that just means your VE table is incorrect. That's all.
Yeah,
or your fuel model. Let me use. I
guess if we could flip this into something positive, there's a couple things that can be wrong. If your fuel model and your ECU is wrong, and we know the Holly model is wrong. We've talked about that because it doesn't take I think RPM into account. Clark knows exactly, but as you go up in boost and up in RPM, VE goes up in a way it shouldn't. Because your RPM is part of your equation and your displacement. It's your RPM and your displacement determines.
And the thing is
volume.
we don't really care as long as it works, but just understand that isn't a true representation of what the VE stands for.
Yeah,
it's important to say that as long as you have the proper fueling, it's fine. It doesn't hurt anything that number is wrong. It just means that you can't rely on that as an accurate number to say what your volumetric efficiency is of your engine at any given point if it's showing high numbers like that.
Yeah. And that's, I guess the note there is to understand your ECU and what it's using as well. So, if you're on an M-Tron or a Motec or a Haltech and you're getting these really high VE numbers, something is off in the rest of your setup. And maybe that's fine. Maybe you've got a setup that is, say, like a returnless boosted setup. You wind up with some really weird stuff in transition. You wind up with some high numbers. But if you're on like a required fuel setup like Mega Squirt or Link in their traditional model, or Holly or something like that, where it's not a true setup, then that might be normal. But understanding that, because it's not a problem until you go and change something. So if you're in an actual VE model and you go and change your commanded AFR, or you change your injectors or something like that, then that's going to change your VE model or your fueling if your VE model isn't correct. So that's why we're so adamant about it. That's why we're so adamant about having injector data that's correct. Because if you're running a real fuel model and you have incorrect injector data, then now your VE numbers are wrong. Because the only way to find VE is empirically. When you're tuning, that's what you're doing. You're finding VE. But that's why I rant so hard about math being math. If your model is right, then it's just math.
All right, Brian, real quick, because we want to go back to weekend recap. And Mr. Bewley has decided to finally join us for the evening.
Yeah.
Graces with his presence.
Hey, I don't want to hear it. Don't give me no bullshit. I'm here, finally, whatever.
I
don't ever see
first time Bewley's got a
Nice.
He is now known as Bougie Bewley, just so you guys know.
Oh, listen to that bullshit.
So, John, how was your weekend? What did you guys do this weekend? We had to talk of how the Camaro did. We had to talk of how Mr. Fowler did. What was your weekend about?
Oh, well, I loaded up and went to Ozark this weekend, and we took Jake and Anna's Cobalt out and ran the Titans a 10-5 race this weekend at Ozark. So made some adjustments with that car. Made a bar change in the suspension, and it really, really liked the bar change. And we were finally able to get some mechanical bite, and we were able to get after it a little bit and basically reset Jake was able to reset his personal best in that car damn near every lap the car went down the track. They won a cash days race on Friday night and come back and went to the semis with it on Saturday night with the actual event. So it was a really good weekend, really good showing with that car. So
Did I read it right?
Ended up going. Yeah, Mark.
You were just about to say it. I interrupted you.
Yeah, we ended up going 458 at 161 with the car, which that lowered the personal best from 471 at 154. So we picked up almost a tenth and a half and 7 miles an hour. So made a pretty big leap.
It's safe to say
Big leap.
the newly founded Foolproof Performance had a good weekend.
Yeah, we had a really good weekend. You know the Camaro ran well. You had the Gorilla Flames going on with old Black Nasty. Derek reset the streetcar takeover quarter-mile street racer record, and it was an all foolproof performance final at the street racer class, the streetcar takeover. Him and Joseph Young out of Amarillo met in the finals there. Jake had a really good weekend with the Cobalt, did really well. So we had a really good weekend, for Foolproof. It was a really, really good weekend. Everybody did really well.
That's the shit I like to hear.
Oh yeah. You had poor Will grinning like from ear to ear this weekend with the
still
with the
smiling.
He's still smiling.
He's still smiling. We had to move the bullhorns a little bit because they're starting to get a little toasty on the paint on the car.
You're gonna have to rotate them out a little bit.
And I think we're going to go up a little more. I think we're going to push for up a little more so we get the flame front going up. If you're going to show off, at least show off all the way.
Right. You can't see how far it's out of the collector unless they're pointed like straight up.
Exactly, Let's see. Did Mr. Fowler make it back in yet?
I don't.
The
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, yeah.
It's fine.
Okay. I'm not trying to rush you. I'm just looking. Barnhill's explaining. But Barnhill, just go on your rant. You're going to type the rant. You might as well just
I
go on
already
your
did
rant.
it. I don't know. Make your fuel model right. Understand. That's really what it is. I don't care what ECU you use. I don't care what model you use. I don't care if you fucking use pulse width or some caveman method. I don't care if you use a carburetor. Understand when you're right and why. And more importantly, understand when you're wrong and why. The why is the part.
It's mostly understand when you make a claim about how the math works that is completely wrong, and there's scientific data and years and years and years of people proving the data is correct and that the math is correct differently than what you're trying to claim.
Like, what did I say when we started? The best thing about math is whether you believe in it or not, it's fucking right.
It's right.
Apparently, you haven't seen how I do math yet.
Well, I mean, if you do
Commentary.
math wrong, you're wrong. That doesn't make math wrong. Physics is physics, you know. You can not believe in gravity all you want, but
And Scott Evans, I don't know if you know Justin McMurtry, and I don't want to put him on blast. I know he does something petroleum based, and he was talking about final boiling points or end boiling points back in your discussion of fuel. But I know he works in something petroleum based, so he'd probably be a good reference if guys that want to know, talk about fuel boiling, because I'm down here in Florida, like I live at sea level. But I know you guys that don't have that, it does, I guess, become an issue. I shouldn't say I know that because it's something I would have never experienced, but I guess that does become an issue at other places in the country.
Well, it becomes more of an issue if you take your sea level junk, which is what I'm dealing with 99% of the time, and drag it up to 10,500 feet. That's where it gets interesting. I at some point in this conversation, I do want to get back to things you do to solve for fuel heating, and where does it come from and how does it occur? Because we went through every caveman cure, high-tech cure we could think of while we were doing this, and we never quite got there other than just having to stop. But I think the most interesting one that we ran across, and Bill pointed this out to us, and I had a nice conversation with Jeff McConnell while I was at Great Bend, about isolating fuel rails for you guys that are running injected cars, isolating the rails from the manifold, because we managed to jointly forget our infrared heat gun, but we were simply finding out where is the heat getting into the system, and the number one place by far was the fuel rails. I mean, you could have fried bacon on those things at certain points.
Okay, but
My theory would have been regulator. I would have been wrong there.
But why would your fuel boil? Like, I can pull a trailer from Fargo to Missouri and back, running the living shit out of it with rails that are bolted right to my intake and not heat the fuel up. So it's more of a pump thing.
Well, Mark, I think it's a combination of things. So in other words, the rails are hot. They're going to be hot on a lot of things. And since we're using, an aeromotive in-tank eliminator pump, even with the controller, we're still circulating a great deal of fuel. So that's part of it. So I mean, like I said,
yeah. So like a water pump, when you move more water, you pull more heat out. I suppose when you move more fuel, you're pulling more heat out of the rails.
Or we're at a certain point absorbing more heat into the rails. I think the other part of the equation to look at is we made two changes to the car before this event, which played a role. Number one, I made the side pipes bigger and longer, which was essentially like putting side skirts on the car. We did that because of noise, just to make it more livable.
It took some of the airflow away.
Yeah, it did. At least that's my belief. Also, because the now extended larger side pipe parallels the two. I run stainless tube, not braided, but just actual stainless tube front to back for the return style system. And they were just on the inside of the pinch weld from where the side pipe sits. So we were thinking we were introducing heat there. Number two, I ran a belly pan because they said they were going to check tech, and they did. For fact, they wanted you to have a diaper or a belly pan. So I made a 15-inch wide belly pan that went basically from the nose of the car right back to the converter, just past the converter. So if anything decided to slop, I would catch it. I believe that the two of those things influenced underhood movement of air. So we ended up jacking up the hood in the back by an inch by putting sockets with bolts on the hinges, because this is a hinged hood on the Fox body. So like I said, we tried a lot of things. We wrapped tin foil around the rails. We wrapped DEI wrap and then reflective wrap around the lines going to the back of the car. And then by adding the ice component to it, we could make all the drives on the flat. Sometimes we had to go 50, sometimes we could go 65 with ice. But in the mountains at the really high elevations, none of those things were affected. So to Mark's point, you have this element of where do you introduce heat, and fuel beating by circulating it means you end up running the fuel multiple times through the rails where you wouldn't if you had a smaller rail. These are 5/8 rails. So there's plenty of time to put lots of fuel through them. So that's what we think, and we'll learn how to fix it. So Mark, go ahead.
No, I have nothing to add.
I can feel so basically you increase side pipe size, so that got you close to the fuel. So obviously pump is going to add heat to the fuel. Then you're running it in a stainless line next to hot exhaust, 3 inches, 6 inches away, whatever the case may be. Then you put that fuel into a now hot fuel rail that is sitting on your intake manifold. Then it goes through a regulator. I would have assumed the heat would come from the regulator because it kind of deadheads and goes through the small orifice there. Then it goes through a return line that's also close to your side pipe / another heat source. So the fuel never got a break. It never got a chance to relax. We never got a chance to cool off, I guess would be the correct term.
And then you've got the monster pump, and you're just circulating it as fast as you can go.
Yeah,
over and over and over and over again.
Hindsight's 20/20. I'd say I can see that now. I wouldn't have seen it beforehand like you. You see what I'm saying? But now it makes sense.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is this is the same car with virtually everything the same as we ran it in drag week at 2016 at relatively low elevation, relatively flat drives. Didn't have this issue. So I know that I changed two things, side pipes and belly pan. Everything else is the same. And then we introduced the altitude function.
I thought this was a new pump and a new tank.
No, all the same. All exactly
the same. Okay.
the same. Yeah. So this is why this caught us out a little bit, because it had been bulletproof at a previous event. Yeah, a few years ago, but again, nothing else really changed. So I think the combination of mismanaging or remanaging airflow under the car, and then the altitude thing, and Scott Evans, I didn't see this data. I meant to look it up before this call. I didn't get a chance to see what is the effective boiling point. Obviously, elevation reduces boiling point in water, so therefore I'm sure it does the same thing in gas. And we were told
It absolutely does.
We were told that by the time you get to 10,000 feet, the boiling point of gasoline is like 100 degrees. So it was
So just I can give you a quick show just with a little screen share, because I was looking for this a second because I thought this might come up. So let's see, this screen should do it, I think. So looking at this is just some VP racing fuel data, and the things to look at are the RVP, the reed vapor pressure, right? The lower the reed vapor pressure, the higher it's going to boil basically initially. It's derived from a test that's like at sea level, 100 degrees. They check and see what kind of pressure it builds up basically. The IVP, initial boiling point. Yeah, initial boiling point. On the right-hand side, I have VP vintage leaded. It's the closest thing I could find a data sheet for in a quick pinch. That's basically leaded gasoline, nothing special. 101 octane, according to this, So it's at that point, that's 101 at the starting point where it starts to cause vapors and boil, right? That's like if you put water on the stove and go to boil it, where you start to see those little tiny bubbles that's what it's talking about, where it's just starting to boil, but not at a full boil. The FBP is the flash boiling point, where it immediately turns to vapor, when it's hot enough that it goes from liquid to vapor without having to transition through so fast, instantly into steam, basically. And you can see like the C16 on the left, that initial boiling point is much, much higher. The reed vapor pressure is much, much lower. So when we look at fuels and we think about things where it's hot, that number makes a world of difference. That's why we like C16 so much for a turbo engine. It's very heat resistant. It's very tolerant of heat. That same thing goes into the fuel side. When you're putting hot air in with the fuel and you're mixing it, how does it react with that hot air? So the higher the flash boiling point, the less it turns into vapor and the more it stays as an atomized liquid, right? Because if you're too hot, you'll instantly vaporize that into a fume and not into the droplets that we need for it to work properly in combustion.
Chris, a gentleman by the name of Chris Smith is asking, Bill, is your full flow through the rails? I'm going to assume, yes, the regulator. I assume the regulator's on the return side of your rails, Bill.
Yes, that's correct. So it's the typical aeromotive model. Can you? Oh, wait. I can't. Are you guys hearing me?
Yeah, we hear you. We hear you.
Yep.
Okay, I'm trying to get my screen. I'm trying to get my screen working. So anyway, so yes, it's the aeromotive model where. That's weird. It's the standard model where it splits as it comes up from the pump, goes through the rails, then goes to the regulator.
I'm looking. Any other questions or anything out there? I'm not seeing a lot. Someone says you looked so great at the Kearney gas station, wherever Kearney is. Apparently you had your model look on.
Somebody's asking how the numbers look on methanol compared to gas. You can go to the VP website and just look it up, C16, and then look at, the M1, look at their 101 octane. You can see all those numbers. They have, just go to the fuel, and then just beneath where it says add to cart, there's some links, and one of them is the data specs, and just click on that one.
It was funny. We had a guy call today and order a standalone ECU, and it's like, yeah, I'm going to run this 900 horsepower VQ. It's a 350Z V6 built engine running 29 pounds of boost in a supercharger, and I want to run dual fuel. And then I was like, all right, cool. Like the guys were telling me, and then like, yeah, he said he's going to run Q16. And immediately I was like, all right, you got to call this guy back right now. We had this exact same conversation, and going back to we had the discussion on VP and the whole C16 versus Q16.
But it smells
the
so
difference.
Much I'm not going to lie. Q16 smells so much better.
Oh, the difference a letter makes.
Yes.
Yeah, M1 doesn't even. They actually don't have a IBP on it.
Yeah, they just show the reed vapor pressure at 4.6, so it's halfway in between C16 and gasoline, basically, for the most part. I can tell you that it boils very low, and it also takes a lot of heat to get it to light as well, which is why you'll see that cars on M1 have a harder time starting when it's cold out. When it's really, really cold, sometimes you have to add a little cap of gas to the intake first to get it to light off, because you need the gasoline fumes to start the car. And then once you have a little tiny, tiny bit of heat in the motor, ever so slightest couple crank over worth of heat in the motor, then it's not a problem.
I'm looking. I gotta give the guys from West Racing Fab a shout out, because they are on here every weekend talking and shooting questions back and forth. Those boys listen every week. So, Bill, I guess the question is, someone's asking, what pump are you thinking? What you thinking about doing, like a 255 in the tank, just a standard old pump to drive the car around, and then keep your big pump for obviously when you want to make horsepower, or what are you thinking of doing?
He might be making. I think he's making the change from his truck to his house. He's not on right now.
All right, fine.
Oh, wait, no. I see him on here. Where? He's muted. He might be talking
There
and
you
not know. No, he's right there.
Boiling point of methanol, 148 degrees
Ooh.
Fahrenheit,
That's- yeah.
67 degrees Celsius. It's really low.
So that's also,
halfway between C and Q.
isn't that also why it's so good at pulling heat out too?
Part of it is that its molecule structure is what is so good at pulling heat out. But yes,
So I got invited to a thing on Facebook today. Apparently they're trying to do a Sunshine State, like a Florida version of the Rocky Mountain Race Week, just hitting the tracks in Florida, 4 tracks, 5 days. I'm intrigued to see how that goes because we don't have any of those down here close to us down here in America's. I won't use the male genitalia word I was about to use, but someone's asking about Q16 on a non-intercooled turbo engine. Yes, don't do it, please.
And even on intercooled, if you're that inefficient, like some of these really crappy supercharger setups, you're still going to be, what was the tip over point? Something like 120 to 140 degree IATs.
Yeah, people have to understand Q is oxygenated. Q is a great fuel if you're in a turbo limited class or a nitrous limited class, something you are out of ways to bring oxygen into the motor and you need to get more oxygen in, then Q is an awesome fuel. If you've got air to give, if you've got turbo to give, you've got an intercooler on the car, even if you have an intercooler on the car, if you've got air to give, I would still be on C16. The margin of error is bigger. It's just going to do the job better. But
yeah, the small percentage you're going to gain on Q isn't worth it in the riskier applications.
yes, but it goes back. Q does smell so much better. Sorry.
I mean, so
depending
on
on
a jug of Q to sniff and put
What
the
is wrong with you?
car.
What?
depending on how.
Smells good. What is wrong with you?
Q16,
Yeah, I think he's dumb.
Q16 is the best smelling race gas.
No, it isn't.
Wait.
You have mental issues.
I think, do
There's
we do a
something-
blind race fuel sniff test like a whiskey tasting?
We should stage this. The RealTuners race gas sniff test.
My wife was standing behind me when I made that suggestion. I don't think she's happy. I'm just getting some eye rolls right now.
Something, because I honestly think Perduto is
Maybe it's 'cause he's
mentally
been
deficient.
sniffing too much CC or Q16.
I don't have enough. Everything around here runs on alcohol, or we run 122, an outlaw 122 in the Camaro. So, but I
See, the other problem with Q16 is that it has the MTBE or whatever in it that eats the crap out of everything.
Yeah.
So you need to be much higher maintenance on your parts, and you need certain things to help fight it. So PTFE lines, plastic fuel tanks, things
Q16 requires the same maintenance as methanol. Is the easiest way to put it.
Yeah. Q16 boiling point, initial boiling point, 100 degrees,
Yep.
right? Flash boiling at 335 degrees. RVP is 7.25, which is just slightly better than pump gas. And it's actually worse than pump gas in some states. Some states, the requirement is, I think California is 6.9 requirement on all the gas they sell. So it's worse than pump gas as far as the boiling point.
The guy Ruben that was in Scott's class this week, and just Q16 with the muscle arms, because he knows how good that Q16 smells. He knows about that Q16 life.
Yeah. Q16 smells so good it'll bring a tear to your eye.
I'd rather stick my head in a pail of M1.
Yeah.
Got to get off the M1 and get on M5. We call the M5 the spicy air.
I mean,
It's
are you
spicy
surprised that
all
the
right.
guy with the company name Full Fruit likes the alcohol?
3 ounces of methanol is guaranteed death.
Exactly. I mean, come on. I mean, why else wouldn't it be that way? Just give me the 200 proof M1 and we're all good.
What you smell all the time is race ethanol. It's all anybody runs, and drifting for the most part. We get a few C16 outliers and stuff like that, but we can't afford that $22 a gallon when we're going through 40 gallons in a weekend.
ethanol just don't
Would
have
that be?
that good smell to it, man. It don't get
It
you
doesn't.
good.
Like Ignite and Thunderbolt has an okay smell, but it's still, I don't know. At the end of the day, it's definitely not the same.
At what point is your methanol foolproof?
I don't know.
Oh, come on.
When you drop in a bottle of Paco Rabanne.
And another Ruben brings up another good point. Whoever invented C85, that fails the sniff test. That is the worst smelling fuel.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say that. It has this very synthetic, like terrible, like smell to it. I don't know what it is, but X85 doesn't smell much better either.
I mean, that's second only to Q16 as far as I'm concerned.
So wait, did we just go from explaining math behind VE and ranting on being correct to picking your fuel based on smell?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
Just to be clear.
absolutely.
Yep.
All right, cool. The real topics here.
Just like we judge our race cars based on color, because you always bet on black. Black's the fastest race car.
Dan Parker would say red.
I
I
can't
don't know. That little white this weekend would probably give you a run for your money on that one for you.
I take that bet. We didn't get any time slips, but I take that bet. However, since we're on commercial break, Dan Parker, the blind machinist, go get yourself a pen. Help the world's fastest, soon to be world's fastest blind man.
I think technically already the world's fastest blind man unassisted.
Is he? Is that how that played out?
Yeah, unassisted. Yep.
Okay.
We should say without human assistance.
Without human assistance.
Yep.
Yeah. So Bill Armstrong has a question. This is probably a better one for most of you guys. A good versus bad IAT temp when using an intercooler. And I'm gonna guess that's a drag racing application, because in drifting I freak out start to get concerned before any of these temperatures. But that's because we're about to send the car on red line for a minute and a half.
Yeah, so Bill has the
Right.
427 small block Ford Fairlane that was runner-up in the stick shift class behind Cletus at RMRW.
If it's air to air and if you're starting with 100-degree IAT or you're starting with 50-degree IAT, that's a big difference, because intercoolers aren't just linear amounts of stuff they take out. Heat in general is, the hotter you get, the harder it is to remove that heat from something. So you kind of have a sloping curve depending on how you start out. If you start out at 100, it's harder to take heat out than if you start at 50.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a air to air, and he's saying 155 to 175 degrees at 20 psi.
That's fine.
That's inefficient, Bill. In my opinion, it's too hard.
Well, that's okay. So
It was 100-degree weekend, though.
John really taught me something a while back, and that's that an air-to-air intercooler does no cooling of air to air. It's just a heat sink. So once again, it's going to depend on what temp you start at. If you start at 100 degrees and you're crossing the finish line, you've put 55 to 75 degrees into that core. I'm going to say that core does not have enough metal mass to keep the airflow you're trying to move cool.
Right, and that's exactly, like, it depends on how long you are. Like, I'll say when I dyno my GTO, which was 18, or I think we were on 15 psi this weekend, and 100-degree dyno cell, we were 125 at the end of the pull, but I was being very nice to it after the pull, getting it to chill down. On a drift car, if we were doing that and we were to go back and hot lap that thing, at some point you're going to heat soak the core and you're going to see that rise.
And you also have to account into the fact that with air to air, it's only going to release as much heat as the air allows it to. So if you have dense, thick, hot air versus dry, cool air, the differences change, right? When it's really, really humid out, you feel the heat more than if it's really, really dry out. And both those things play a factor into how much heat come out of the air as well, right? It's both the heat going in and pulling it back out of it involves that humidity portion of the air as well.
Yeah,
Right, and the biggest thing is how much gain you get over a run. I mean, most of the time with a good Garrett core, on an 1/8 mile run, you shouldn't pick up more than 30, 40 degrees on an 1/8 mile run, and you shouldn't pick up more than 60 degrees over your starting temp on a 1/4 mile run. So if you're gaining any more than that, start to finish on 20 to 25 plus PSI, in my opinion, you don't have enough core on the car.
So in this case, he's got the right amount of core by that math, because it was like, I think they were saying it was 90, 100 degrees in a few places. It was a hot weekend.
Right, but he's got 100.
He's got 155
but he's only
175.
Yeah, if he
Yeah, but they were 1/4 mile racing, John.
Yeah, and they were a 1/4 mile in it. That's reasonable.
Yeah, if he starts at 100 and he's going through the traps at 175 on 20 pounds, yeah, I mean, remember what I just said. I said if he's 24.
But you don't have the heat. You're not
plus
thinking
pounds.
about the heat soak.
Right, but
he didn't start at
in my
ambient
opinion-
temperature. He probably started at engine bay temperature of a lot hotter.
Right. If he started at 120, he's only picking up 50 degrees. But in my opinion, the core is borderline too small for what it is. You got to remember, I know that car. I know that combination. It's got my
Sure.
cam in it. So in my
On the
opinion,
right size turbo.
The turbos on it are probably being pushed a little hard now for what it is. So he's seeing a 40-degree rise. So he's starting at 130. So, one way to gain efficiency in that is carry a little 2-gallon garden sprayer and spray the intercooler core down in the pits before you go to staging, and try and draw as much heat out of the core as possible and get the temperature of the aluminum of the core down as far as you can get it down.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
if you can do that, then that gets you some BTU room for the aluminum to absorb out of the air that's going to go through the core for the motor. And that'll help with the efficiency of it a whole lot. I tell all my air-to-air guys that try to drag race with the air-to-air, that $25 for that little 2-gallon garden sprayer with just, with some
It's awesome.
garden hose water is the greatest little backwoods, hack that you can do with an air-to-air turbo car.
Yeah, we do that.
Buy you a couple gallons of distilled water.
Drive.
Right, go get the jug that you can buy that are made for like the at-home water cooler things, and just get the distilled water and use that instead rather than garden hose water. Your car will like you better.
So I got a question
yeah.
on this. If you hose down an intercooler, how long and how hot do you have to run it before you're not the one who's dripping water under
That's
your
where
own
my brain
tires
was right there.
when you do the burnout? Because that's what I was wondering. Could you spray it with something else?
Methanol.
like
that's the
methanol.
No. That's the reason why I said use a garden sprayer, Bill. If you take a garden sprayer, you just put some
mist.
mist.
Yeah.
You don't. It will actually, when you spray that on 150 to 170 degree aluminum, it will more than likely vaporize the water off the core, and that's what's going to take the heat out of the aluminum.
I mean,
You don't have to soak. You don't have to spray it down with a 1-inch garden hose to get the temperature out of the aluminum. And you don't have to spray it to the point that there's water physically dripping off the core. You can judge yourself. If you spray it down and you spray, make 3 or 4 passes back and forth across the core, there could be a little water dripping off of it. But if you do that 10 minutes before you go to staging, odds are any condensation or any excess water that was physically adhered to the core on the exterior of it will be gone by the time you even pulled into the staging lane.
so I mean,
And the heat will be out of the core itself.
yeah, this is the only way we that's a like go-to on the drift paddock. And we're spraying all the way in our staging up until the car is about to get sent. Because we get so little practice, you kind of have to hot stage the cars and hot lap them. So you're sitting there heat soaking, car running, or you're pushing the car to try to keep the heat down. And I mean, we'll soak them, and by the time the car's in the burnout box, there's really nothing dripping off of it.
If
You guys don't need to spray them nearly as bad either. So I
if
wouldn't.
you're really, really worried about it, you could always go nitrogen inert, argon inert, or CO2.
CO2,
All
yeah.
of them will cool when you change them from liquid to vapor, and all of them are inert and won't hurt anything.
I mean, hell, there's plenty of off-the-shelf CO2 intercooler sprayers as well, but On that topic, I was actually thinking about this because I was basically we just tuned the Pro Drift car I built for a different driver that's now in a new driver's hands. We just retuned that. I'm about to hand that car back over. I'm making a list of. We added a big ice box to the car. That's one change we made. If you are an air to water guy and you make a pass, you come back and shut the car off. Your cores in your supercharger, if you're a supercharger car, are going to sit there and heat soak. So one thing we did on most of the supercharger cars we do is we'll leave the power on to at least the ECU and the pump while the car is sitting in staging. And if IT's over really 90 to 100 degrees, we're cycling the water to force those cores to stay cool to give us a little more room in the heat sink. So that way when the car fires up, those cores are, what if it's ice water, 60, 70, 80 degrees rather than, reaching steady state with the intake manifold, which could be 140, 150 degrees.
So,
And you got to remember what you're seeing on the cooler itself. It's the air temperatures while they're pulling out. The cooler is catching up after the fact, right? Because it's got to soak the heat in. So the heat that goes through the intake, the intercooler is going to be hotter than the air that goes through the intake by the time it pulls that heat out.
we got Kevin Van Noy asking, won't the burnout heat soak the core again? Of course it will, but if you start cooler before the burnout won't heat the core as high as it would have if you hadn't cooled beforehand. I guess would be the correct.
The burnout's going to heat soak the core either way. So do you want to start heat soak at 100 degrees or do you want to start heat soak at 60 degrees?
Kevin's going to make a joke now about if you had a blow through carburetor, it probably wouldn't matter because it'd probably cool it for you, but I'm going to let him make that joke. Talking about John Ryan asked about Buddy spraying intercoolers with nitrous, same as we were just talking about CO2 and argon. In my opinion, I have seen the quantity of nitrous needed to cool a core is so large, and I'm not talking about just cooling the very front face where you spray it, but to cool the size of cores we're talking about, it requires a massive quantity of nitrous to do that job. Bill Armstrong saying that
nitrous is not very good at cooling.
No, it is not. Bill Armstrong is saying he used a garden spray at Rocky Mountain Race Week, and the water was totally evaporated within 2 minutes, and the core was noticeably cooler.
I mean, I know that Evans wants to use distilled water or something like that, and it's definitely nicer on stuff. But like in our case, the cores are getting washed. They get rainwater. They get washed with garden hose water. So we would just pack a garden sprayer full of ice and then top it off with water, and just try to get that temperature as low as possible and get them as soaked as possible to help get the heat off of them.
Yeah, a lot of people have that intercooler behind something and they're not taking their car apart to wash the intercooler. And
yeah, it's true.
My point is that
right in front.
My point is that you have all kinds of minerals and stuff that sit in the water that comes out of your tap, and that stuff eats away at the metal and does bad things to it. And the last thing you want is your core to fail because somewhere down the road you picked up a bunch of too much gunk and it corroded something.
I'm used to we've got radiator in the back wide open and intercooler or heat exchanger right up front wide open. So
yeah, and it's not like it's going to happen all the time that it's going to cause that problem. And we drive our cars in the street and all kinds of crap, and radiators hold up to all kinds of abuse, so it's not really a huge concern. It's just one less thing to have to think about if you use clean water.
Jared Tucker, air to water with no circulation, packaging and weight savings, drain and fill every pass. And is that better or worse than a bigger air to air? I like the idea. A buddy of mine's got one, but we ice it every single pass. We drain it and ice water that thing every pass, and it will come off the end of the track cold. Now,
circulation? That doesn't make sense to me.
No, yeah, basically it's like an air-to-air intercooler in a water tank. So you pour the ice and water that you want in the tank. Basically, the intercooler is just sitting there in that bath, and then at the end of the pass, you can fill it back up again.
Yeah, one of our drift cars is set up that way.
Not really. Yeah, it's not really air to water. It's water cooled air to air.
Yes, basically.
It's a water bath heat soak.
Okay, that makes sense. Now I understand what we're saying. You're just running it through into the tank that's sitting next to you in the passenger compartment. So you got a big old, pile of cold whatever. God, I'm old, but I can remember when Buddy Ingersoll was running the turbo car in Pro Stock, and they had this mix that came out that they had cooled with dry ice that looked like ethylene glycol. So it was this looked like a soft serve ice cream that they would pour into the intercooler before each pass.
Yeah, I mean I remember back when in the big Supra street drag race days, guys were doing that, and they're getting IATs below ambient and all kinds of crazy stuff.
So
you can absolutely take the gel stuff that they use in those cold compresses. You can take the stuff that's in those and use it as an intercooler fluid like that on something that's just a soaked intercooler, not a flowing intercooler. And that's what they were doing that's what you were seeing, Bill, is that kind of stuff.
So Patrick Higginbotham just hit on something I was about to talk about. So in my short stint as a diesel performance guy, I got to go to a lot of tractor pull races. And for those guys out there that think racing is expensive, when you get into tractor pull racing, take everything you think you know about racing, dollars-wise, and multiply it by 1,000. You don't know how much money gets spent until you walk into your first tractor pull. And a lot of those guys do the ice bath. Now they have big tanks on these rigs, but they do a lot of and they also do some weird stuff where, and they're the most secretive group of guys you ever met in your life, but they're putting like cutting oil and like the oil you use in cutting tools in with the water in there, because they say that creates some form of layer on the aluminum that'll help it take the heat out or in faster.
That essentially sounds like they're trying to model it, or act as a surfactant of some sort. So that's interesting. I never tried it, but everybody does that. The coolant I run is this NASCAR crap that's supposed to be, better as a surfactant as opposed to running any conventional antifreeze coolant. Seems to work.
Are you running the Evans?
Running temp? No, I run the Xerox.
Oh, okay.
Racing stuff. It was good for 20 degrees of operating temperature. I mean, I can tell you that, just engine operating temperature, by going from straight water to that.
Someone just asked this question I was scared. What is better in the ice box with water, dry ice or regular ice? So I don't know if you've ever experimented with dry ice in a water to air intercooler, but you ever heard of what a dry ice bomb is?
Anytime you capture it when it does the state change in a closed compartment.
You better have a really good vent.
Now, hang on. There is once again, tractor pulling guys, I watched an experiment with this. There's a lot of chemicals you could put in your water to air intercooler besides water. Stuff like ethylene glycol does not have that effect on dry ice. So there's there's methanol. So there's a lot of trickery out there too. Just because water intercooler doesn't mean maybe we should call it a liquid air intercooler, doesn't mean it's flowing water. And I've seen sub-zero IATs on some of those tractor pull trucks when they start getting up there to the very front of the line, doing stuff like that.
Yeah, so, the methanol dry ice is what I've seen guys do before.
And I've also seen is it CNR that makes the true dry ice intercooler? Like it's just like looks like a box. You take the top off, put dry ice in, and close the box back up.
Yeah. It's just you like use pelletized dry ice and just pack it around it.
Yep, that's all you do.
Yeah, their ice barrel or whatever I think they call it.
Yeah, so there's quite a few ways, and I've been thinking about, because one of the diesel drag guys, I believe it's Rudy's, actually uses that CNR ice pellet deal. And I was contemplating that on some of these turbo cars down here, because it's, we had Cole's car racing. Taking the intercooler out of Cole's car saved several 100 pounds, because it's not just the pump, it's not just the tank, it's not just the intercooler. It's, you got 10 gallons of water and ice in the back of it. You've got the water in the 1-inch fuel lines going all the way to the front of the car, however much water is in the tank up front. I mean, you've probably got 70 to 100 pounds of just water.
Yeah.
So, and we're in a world where we're scalloping hinges to save grams, yet we're pouring 20-pound bags of ice in the car.
Yeah. So I've seen a few guys do it. I've never seen it done in a way that I've been super happy with it. But some guys have done the whole AC compressor chiller system on their intercooler.
Yep.
Usually the ones I've seen are like borderline and kind of a car that's already has a problem. They've done it as a Band-Aid. I'd love to see a really good version done. And in the road racing world and some of the other stuff, so the FIA actually requires a 75-degree cockpit temperature. So like we've got this Porsche, this GT2 RS Cup car, at the shop that some of the guys crew for and take care of. And for those of you not aware of that, that's a $490,000 race only Porsche, and this one's the only one that's ever been delivered to a private residence because the guy lives in New Hampshire and he didn't have to pay sales tax on it. And that's not a small chunk of change at $500,000. But these cars all have AC in them. A lot of Le Mans cars have AC because the FIA requires a cockpit temperature. So the argument of we don't want to drive an AC compressor is already out the window.
Interesting.
I'm not sure. I keep meaning to dig down, and because we've debated doing it in some of the drift cars. Has anyone ever done a really good setup on this, or is there an electric AC compressor that's worth the extra amp load that would make a big enough difference in the temperature, especially on short run cars like drag cars or drift cars or something like that?
I can tell you from observation that the AC based cooling deal that the Hellcats have, the Demon has, works, because we went out to test and tune with Kenny Wayne Shepherd, and he has a Demon. And as we went through the process of, it was the first time he had the car out, went through all the various things, the launch control, but that cooling thing, he picked up 2/10 between laps, and he made like 13 laps on that car. So it works.
They have the same system for the CTSVs, correct? I think Interchiller or something like that.
I can't tell you exactly how it works. We had no access to see what the plumbing was.
John asking about cool cans for fuel. Does anyone still talk about those? I haven't seen that in probably 10 years. I don't know. It probably would have helped build out this weekend, but
yes,
we had massive conversations about that. Great idea. Couldn't execute it timely. I used to run one way back in the day when I had a stock eliminator car before NHRA banned them a long time ago, but I can't find that in the rules anymore. So they must be legal again.
A super simple fix for the heat, for a way to cool it, is you just buy a transmission cooler that is AN fittings on it, and you can run it through and use it passively and just letting it radiate heat, and that will help substantial amounts through that. Usually helps
on the return line, I'm assuming.
Yeah, the return line. Yes, return line. And as long as it's got a big enough inlet and outlet that matches what your existing return line is, it's not a restriction.
Bill, who was posting, told me that using the heat gun after he installed little phenolic spacers on his fuel rails, saw a 45-degree reduction in the heat at the rail. By his are mounted horizontally. Bolt goes into a boss on the manifold, and instead of having the aluminum spacer, he installed a phenolic spacer. 45 degrees. That's a lot.
Yeah,
so we're going to be doing something like that.
The fuel setup, because the whole argument, you see guys, heat wrap their whole intake or something like that, and if you've seen the math do out, typically the fluid is moving too quickly through most of these to pick up that much heat in a given area. But I'd wonder, especially on a deadheaded fuel rail system versus a pass through, if that makes a difference as well. Because my thought would normally be that the fuel is moving through the rail quick enough that it's not going to pick up a lot of heat from the rail itself, unless the rail is so hot that the fuel is actually.
But you're moving the fuel so quick it comes back around again.
Right.
So
That's
you're constantly running it through.
Is if your fuel volume isn't big enough to have a consistently lower temperature fuel, it could over time.
So to add to that, part of the whole cooling process is having turbulence, right? So when we talk about somebody saying, I'm having a hard time keeping my engine cool, and I've got this big radiator and blah, 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 and I got these big fans and it still isn't cooling, it typically comes down to they're not flowing enough water fast enough and turbulent enough. So the more turbulence you create, the more surface area you create. So when you flow fuel through rails, it's often very, very turbulent. So it can pick up a lot of heat really, really quick. Even though it's such a short space, it can still pick up a considerable amount of heat in that little space.
I mean, at the end, you're still
just got to remember that.
Yeah, you're limited by entropy in the end as well. In the case of charge air cooling, you've got the whole world worth of air that you're pulling in. You're not going to heat the external air not to turn this into a global warming argument, but in the short amount of time you're running your car, you're not going to heat the outside air around you to change that. But in your fuel system, the heat doesn't have anywhere to go. So like Mark said, you're cycling it all the time. That heat's always going up. It's staying in the system. The only thing that can get out is what radiates. So if you don't have cooling, it's going to stay in your system. Same thing in your cooling system. Yeah, guys say, oh, my car's not cooling. I'm just going to put, more fans on it, more air, more air, more air. Well, if your water pump and your system can't get the heat to the exchanger, which is a radiator, and then your exchanger can't transfer that to the air, it doesn't matter how much air you push through it. It's not going to push any more heat out.
All right, we're going to make a left-hand turn. Someone just asked, I'm using a Holley Dominator with drive-by-wire. Is it possible better to restrict the drive-by-wire off a brake switch versus using a two-step on the starting line while drag racing? I'm going to say no. I won't.
Yes.
Yes?
I'm going to say yes.
Oh.
So there's in the advanced tables, you can use, and somebody is killing us with typing or noise from something. I don't know what. You can use the advanced tables to modify the drive-by-wire values, and using that, you could then create a two-step rev holder, much like we can do with timing or anything else. Instead of being a hard limit, you can find that, it's going to take some fine-tuning and playing with to get it there, but you can absolutely take and partially close back the throttle to slow the RPM down. And then when you release the button, it opens back to whatever your foot's at. So you can absolutely modify it through an advanced table in the Holley EFI system.
I guess the question is it possible? Yes, I'll give you that. Okay. Is it better? And if it's better, why?
I think that would depend.
So I don't know if it can hold an RPM steady versus bouncing up and down an RPM, that's that much more accurate your launch is.
But you have the delay time of the throttle body opening. It's minuscule, but it's there.
You absolutely do. You absolutely do have delay, because as fast as people think drive-by-wire is, it's incredibly slow in the realm of reaction.
If you're sitting with a car off, put key on and slam your throttle, you can hear the two clicks. It's slow enough that your mind can register two events.
And I use, typically in a drag race application, let's say we have and I hate rating stall converters in RPM, but I'm going to use it here for reference. Let's say we have a 5,000 RPM stall converter. I'm going to use my two-step below it so that the motor has some pre-rev time to run into the torque converter. So I'm going to have my two-step at take 3,000. That way at release of the button, the motor has 2,000 RPM of climb time, quote-unquote free spooling, to bang in the torque converter to get me a little more torque off the line, and I feel like I'm going to affect it with that.
So that's a really interesting question, Mike, because when Scott and I were working on my car, I had been running along the whole time on a low level, 3,100 RPM, which is basically the lowest level on a two-step where it would sit in the lights clean.
Yep.
And then we upped the RPM on the two-step several times over three different pulls.
Yep.
And the car 60-footed and hit the tire faster and went quicker each time we raised it.
Oh, there's definitely a window there. So you can fall below that point because, so the torque converter is going to come on. And why I say I hate using RPM ratings for torque converters. For those that don't know, torque converters stall ratings are torque dependent. You put a torque converter behind a motor that makes 2,000 foot-pounds of torque, it's going to be a very different torque converter than if you put it, or a very different stall than if you put it behind a motor that makes 500 foot-pounds of torque. So there's a break point there, Bill, as you start to approach. Every converter is going to act different, and you almost have tests on every car. But if you take a car like, let's say the Camaro, for example, and you just let it sit on the torque converter, it's going to be a slug out the hole because you don't give it any chance to slap the converter before the kit.
It wants to flash.
Yeah, the converter's starting to couple already prior to you letting go. In your case, with an RPM so low on the two-step, I'm wondering if you were taking so much torque away from the motor that you were almost beginning to let the torque converter couple down there prior to you letting go of the button, if that makes sense.
So part of the problem is releasing it releasing it at 3,000 RPM means that you're driving the car before it gets to the flash point where it can actually take off. And that's part of launching low. That's what it's doing. It's starting to move forward before it hits the torque converter to apply all the power in that high RPM. Where the higher we take it, within reason, if we get all the way up to that limit of where it wants to flash at on its own at your power level, it goes slow again once we're up on the torque converter at the top. If we can bring it back even just a couple hundred RPM, often that fixes that problem and it allows it to launch harder.
Yeah.
In our case at the track, we started at what did we start? Like, I think the first hit we did 3,800 just so we could check suspension and make sure everything was right. And I immediately said, take it up to 44. You know, like immediately after the first pass, I knew right away it wanted more RPM just by seeing how it hit the tires.
Yeah, and we moved it up a total of 3 steps up off of the original. We didn't even try it at the original 3,100. And then we went 38, and then we went 42, and then we went 46. And based on where the converter flashes, even off of a foot brake, which is closer to, 6, we had room to go. We never got there. And to get the car to leave at Rocky Mountain Race Week, I actually backed it back down. So when I ran at Pueblo, I ran a relatively good ET at Pueblo because I put it back to 3,800. And the car, reacted. And,
Track prep was more or less kind of slick prepped, not really radial prepped. And you had a tire that really wanted a radial prep, which is why I suggested the other tire we talked about that combines a radial and a slick compound, and it makes a difference on marginal or slick prepared tracks. You know, that would have been the difference, but no time to get that stuff before we hit. But, you know, on our testing day, the track was prepped. It wasn't quite a full radial prep, but it was a good prep that was better than a slick prep. It was like halfway in between a flypaper radial and a slick prep. And we probably could have hit your car at 5,000 RPM, and that track probably would have taken it pretty well.
Yeah, whereas the first time, go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say, back on the drive-by-wire versus ignition two-step, kind of on the same where on the converter and stuff like that, there might actually be a fine line there where I don't know if I'd ever do a two-step 100% on drive-by-wire, but you do know depending on the throttle body size, you know that if the throttle body is wide open, where we talked about having too much throttle body and the throttle response off the line, you could get around that. You know, when you're leaving the line, you know how much air is coming in. You could calculate how much air you need. So from that, you can get how much throttle mass flow I need. And if you went that route, and the nice thing is something like an M-Tron or something like that, you could actually do that calculation that the throttle really only needs to be open that much. And that theoretically should be the best reaction for the engine. I don't know if that math is worth it, but it's there.
Ryan, can I tell you something?
The one place it helps is you can slow down the actual climb of the RPM and make it not hit the two-step so hard, and that helps correct the amount of deviation between the top and the bottom of the two-step, right? If you're swinging 200 RPM, that's quite a wide window. If you can get it down to 25 RPM by just closing the throttle a little tiny bit, that's a whole lot better.
Brian just nerded out so far over my head. I'm sitting here like drooling right now. Like, what did you say to me?
So you know that Zach Galifianakis meme where it's just him counting cards and all the math?
Yes.
A number of times a week, I have that sent to me when I try to explain something. I think we're up to 3 times this week already.
Kevin Van Noy asked, which car do you have? I'll let you explain that here in a second. And John Ryan asked about the NASCAR Xerox stuff. And he says he said something about car for car, a combo can run 30 degrees cooler. Is that what you said? Never heard of this stuff.
So one question. I'm going to take the second. Yeah, it used to be Xerox. Now it's called Valvoline. It's quote unquote NASCAR coolant. The point is it's legal to run at racetracks, whereas you can't run antifreeze or other stuff at most tracks. And so what it has in it is a surfactant, a little bit of lubricant for the water pump and so forth, and it has some other things in it that the net was, what I did was we ran it on straight. We had originally antifreeze in it, which sucked. Then we ran straight water and drove around. We have this toll road near my house, which has a 1 mile, 8 10-degree rise. And so I go test a long pull on that and see what the temperature was. And then we put this stuff in it and did the same thing. And it was 20 degrees cooler at the top of the big pull. And I just observed over multiple drag weeks that this stuff really helps the car stay cool. We never had an overheating problem anywhere with this, including the mountains. So to go back to the first question, the car is an 87 Fox notch with a 600 cubic inch big block Ford in it, which we ran NA at Rocky Mountain Race Week. So
Big block
Glide.
Which
Ford.
Which version of the Xerox?
It's
NASCAR.
Yeah, it's Valvoline supercoolant is what they call it. It comes in little 1 quart. You dilute it.
Tiny bottles,
10
yeah.
to 1. Yeah, tiny bottles, 10 to 1 in terms of the volume of deionized water. They even say you can run tap water, but they do not say distilled. They say deionized, demineralized, or even tap, but they don't want you to run distilled for some reason.
Yeah, so distilled is actually distilled can cause as much buildup as tap water because it still has some minerals in it, and that there's a lot more chemical stuff to it. But you want to run deionized in your cooling system, not distilled. Distilled is better than hooking your garden hose up, but there's still a lot of corrosion that distilled can use. So ideally, in any of your cooling system, especially with aluminum, run deionized. Basically galvanic reactions and stuff like that.
Kent Irwin's asking about tuning using a Davis GPS and tuning with an accelerometer. I'm going to give you a quick answer. The G meter in any drag car, and I'm going to assume you're talking drag car because you're talking wheelie control. The G meter is the most important sensor in any race car, period. That being said, I'm going to tell you to go back and listen to past. We had actually Shannon Davis on the show with videos and everything of the sensor being used, and you'll get more watching that show than I can give you in 2 minutes right now answering your question. So go back and find the show with Shannon Davis. That'll answer every question you got and even have the graphics on the screen of showing you how to do it.
I think we had a question in YouTube as well. Yeah, Jerry, Holly Dominator, 7,500 RPM limit, main rev limiter, had a pass where the car hit the rev limiter at 7132. Using a dual sync on our SBC. Is resolution noise an issue here? You guys probably have more experience with that setup as far as the noise.
I'm going to blame noise for it to randomly pop a limiter up 400.
Yeah. Are we sure it was a limiter and not a valve spring issue or something?
Yeah.
Well, do you happen to have a coolant temp or any limiter corrections? I see this on a lot of Haltech and Link stuff where typically a higher IATs and coolant temps sometimes bring the limiter down.
Scott points out that that's a lot of RPM for a dual sync too. That's a lot of RPM with very low resolution.
Yeah, it's probably more likely a noise issue. If you want to check the dumb stuff, make sure you don't have a limiter correction and it's interpolating. Like if you got 7,000 set at 230 degrees and 7,500 set at 200 degrees and you were at 229 or something, it's going to be interpolating between those. So check that. But noise would make sense from what you guys are saying.
Yeah, I'm going to blame noise. And Chris Smith says apparently Barnhill brings logic to our group. Screw you, Chris. How's that sound? No, I'm totally kidding. I'm totally kidding. Barnhill's a smart son of a gun. That's why I was over here saying he way over my head earlier.
I forget what I was explaining something to my wife. I think I had the V rant, but I told you guys before this when I walked upstairs and looked at my wife and had the math rant. And my wife looks at me and is like, so what? We're just under 2 months from her due date now. And she's like, so when our kid needs emotional support and something, care, whatever, they're going to come to me. When they need someone to talk them to sleep, they're going to come to you.
Wow, that's harsh.
That's apparently what she, when she was a kid, when she needed something, needed food, water, whatever, or was upset, she'd go to her mom. When she couldn't sleep, she'd go to her dad. And her dad's my wife's an engineer too, but her dad's an engineer, and her dad would just talk about some topic and she'd eventually fall asleep. So
let me explain why you're not going to sleep. So what you're hearing is a cochlear interference with your breathing in the walls of the crib. So if we can reduce the velocity of breath over the curvature of your pillow.
Whoa, dude.
Hey, man, I didn't say my
Damn it,
textbooks
Bill!
for nothing.
You stopped just in time. I was about out.
Oh, man.
Sorry, Brian.
No, you're
We
good.
love you.
I hear it every day. Like I said, I might have. I gotta check my messages now. I explained some stuff to a couple people earlier, but I'm sure I've got another 2 or 3 of the Galifianakis math memes left before the end of the week.
If I was your wife and I wanted you to stay up all night, I'd look at you right before bed and say, "The math is wrong, Brian. The math is wrong."
Do not give her any ideas.
Whisper in his ear. Whisper in his night. If you don't tune in Lambda, you don't even know what tuning is.
Oh man.
Oh my.
The math is wrong, Brian.
Open the pod bay door, Hal. Yes. Oh no.
I have an issue with tonight's show, guys. We haven't really started like any crap with anyone tonight. This is weird.
Well, we brought up the VE table tuning.
Okay, yeah, I guess.
I'm
No, that
still
was
on
light.
the post race week thing where you can't really think anymore. I will tell you the one other thing I would remind anybody who's doing endurance drag racing is we were really anal about nut and bolt check and all that other sort of stuff, and we still had crap break. I had one of my straps on my trailer break on the way back. That was exciting. One of my spares on my trailer started to fall off. I caught that in the rear view mirror. We had stuff break on the race week trailer. We had some really fun roads. I told you I put that belly pan. I haven't waited to look underneath that thing because it caught a lot of gravel and a lot of other stuff. We drove over a road that was freshly chip sealed, and it pulled all the paint off the side pipe for about a foot in front of the rear tire. So the thing to remember about endurance drag racing, if your car is pretty, it won't be when you get to the end, except probably for Bill's Fairlane, which just looked annoyingly good all the time. But for the rest of us, I'm taking the car to Donuts on Saturday, and people are going to look like, you took this piece of trash in public? Because that's what it looks like right now. It's covered with bug shit and everything else. But I'm going to put the trophy in the back seat. So, yeah.
So you bring up a good point. While we got a couple seconds, I'm waiting on another question to pop up. But for those guys that are out there racing, I cannot stress enough how good a pre and post race inspection of your race car is. How much it will save you, how much it could save your life, how much it could save your motor. A solid, and it seems dumb. When's the last time you checked to see how tight the lower control arm bolts are in the back of your car?
Right before I put it on the trailer.
Well, I mean our listeners as a whole, because we when's the last time after a race you hey, pull the valve cover off and let's take a look, and you might find something before it turns into you needing a whole motor. That's something you guys really need to add to your programs.
And that's the thing. A lot of people are like, I check it all the time and I never find anything. You can't count the failures that don't happen.
Exactly.
But it's free to check for them. It's not free when you didn't. So,
which is why I put new valve springs in the motor right before we left, because valve springs are consumable on these cars, at least, with kind of lift and duration I run. So I've learned the hard way over years of doing this, that there are a whole bunch of things that you have fresh and good before you go. And to Mike's point, you check all that stuff. And then this weekend, I'm going to do the post-race check and find all the broken crap, because I know there are odd noises the car makes now it didn't used to make. And I don't know exactly what's wrong or stretched or broken. But
didn't you say your door won't open now on the trailer?
Yeah, literally. The ride height has changed. So I got to figure that one out. Everybody was saying, "Oh, that car looks really good that low," and I'm looking at it, it's like, it's not supposed to be that low. so it self-lowered.
I think the big one too is like looking at it and saying that looks fine. Like, put a wrench on it. You don't need to tighten it, but make sure it's tight. Put a wrench on it. It's like, yeah, we've had, the drift car that I said we're turning back over, that's one of the reasons I'm making the list of things to give to the guy. Like, it was missing an axle bolt. Every axle bolt was loose. It was missing a motor mount bolt. And the car didn't have an oil change from the time I bought the oil before I put it on the dyno. And this is the car that normally gets an oil change mid-event. So it's cheap. It's free in most cases. It could save your car. It could save you a lot of money. It can save your life. I think that's the biggest one.
Yeah, I checked the lash twice on the trip. I know there's some people more anal than I am that check it every day. I didn't do that, but I checked it twice after having checked it before it went on the trailer. And, you know, we did the basic bolt check, but my parachute mount / trailer hitch, that loosened up on 2 of the drives. You know, something we caught, but geez. You know.
You mentioned, too, when we started about them checking your safety gear, you know, you shouldn't rely on tech to catch when your safety gear's out of spec. You don't want to learn that way when you're getting failed in tech for not having it, but you know, check your belts, check your dates when you're doing your maintenance. Make sure you know when your fire bottle expires, when your seats expire, when your belts expire. When was the last time some of the helmets I see at tracks, 10-year-old helmets that look like they've been kicked across the paddock 20 times.
Yeah, I was a little embarrassed. We when we went to Irwindale for the testing tune the week before is when it was pointed out to me on the Hans, and I'll be honest, I had not looked at the dates tag, the SFI tag on the Hans.
I forget what
I've looked at everything else. I'd never looked at that. It was embarrassing, but I didn't have time to fix it. So I told the tech guy, I said, my Hans is out of date by a year. We didn't get a chance to do it, and he said, yeah, it's okay. So.
I'm actually impressed that they were, you know, I enjoy that. I think that's a good thing, but I'm impressed they were checking that in depth, I guess is the correct
I think that's a good. If you are in a series, I don't care what kind of racing it is, that is enforcing safety rules, don't go around getting butthurt about it and complaining, because at the end of the day, they're trying to keep their insurance so they can keep that track running, because a lot of times these are insurance requirements, and they're trying to make sure there's no injuries or worse, deaths that are going to completely shut the sport down for everybody.
I fully 100% support that. When we were, ahead of every event, everybody's on the forums and all that and talking about it. And one of the things that they shared was that the Bandimere guys were going to do a really thorough tech. And frankly, Drag Week is kind of famous for tech. And it's like, I'm pretty anal about that stuff, number one. And number two, the tracks, we always say the closer you are to Glendora, the better the tech is. So, I mean, I've had them pick up stuff like there's supposed to be little pins in your belt where if you have a clip in like an eyelet attachment, like I do for the lap belt part of it, there's supposed to be a little pin. You can see the little tiny hole drilled in where the clip in. There's supposed to be a pin in that. I didn't even know that. And I called Impact where I get them from. I said, do you guys have those pins? And they said, nobody ever wants them, so we don't send them. And it's like, so I put paper clips in it. I know, high tech. But the point is, by being prepared, I thought I had all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. And why I really like that is I know the guy in the next lane went through the same thing. That's why I like it.
Yeah, and that's a big
at
one.
Drag Week, they make sure you have a horn that works.
Yeah. Funny thing, our horn quit in the middle of the
now.
trip. So we started using revs instead. Somebody walks in front of the car, "Wah!" So you can just wake them up.
That'll scare somebody.
Yeah, it was funny. But yeah, literally the horn quit working in the middle of the trip. I don't know. But I had wipers, so there.
And actually, pro tip, don't make your fucking horn button look like your start button. Ariel Adam, they're right next to each other.
Wow.
The number, normally, if whoever's in the car, some of the cars are harder to get out of. We usually honk our horn if we need someone to come check out the dyno. The number of times I had guys scrambling to run into the dyno room because I went to start the car and hit the wrong fucking button. Literally 2 inches away from each other, look the same.
That's a great tip. We converted my windshield washer. The Fox, they do everything on a stock like a lot of cars. And so since I don't have windshield washers on the car and I have a removable steering wheel, we made that the horn button. So when you push on the end of the stock, that's the horn button. So you adapt. What else we got?
Brett Sanders asks, any recommendation of a company to reinstall a stock converter? A little science project for my 2.3 turbo. 2.3 turbo that could. Converters are not offered for transmission other than stock. I'm sure I know I have a local guy here in Central Florida that'll do it. I'm sure FTI would do it. There's plenty of converter companies up there. I'm sure they can loosen it up some.
Does he want to loosen it up?
He didn't say that. He just said restall. So I'm going to assume.
Yeah. Because if you want to tighten it up, you can try some of that high guard stuff. That made my entire setup go slower. I know people say that's
the
great,
seals and the transmission too. If
yeah.
you put high guard in it, just expect more often transmission rebuilds. It doesn't have the proper lubricants in it.
Heard it here first, guys. I've never been on a transmission forum in my life where somebody didn't bring up running the tractor fluid thing.
Let's see. Jonathan, motion makes they don't mess around out here. Safety equipment. Kevin Van Noy apparently met you at a racetrack somewhere. Mr. Bill.
Yes, we.
Fontana?
What?
He says Fontana?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right. That was when we were out there with Evans. Or no, this is a while back. That's Fontana. That goes way back. But we've just, I have to say once again, drag race fans are the best. We were having our heating problem, and by the time we finally crawled our ass into Kearney after the tire thing and everything else, and we asked, over the PA, could people maybe find us some DEI stuff so we could wrap some things. There were like 20 people came over with it. It was awesome. So it's fun meeting people at these things and hanging out with them. That's one of the reasons it's such a great trip, is instead of you go to the weekend, you make your pulls, you leave, you get to spend real time with people. And the more time you spend on the side of the road waiting for your fuel to cool, the more people you get to meet. So
yeah. I think that's really cool that the camaraderie in a lot of motorsports is still there.
Yeah, by the way, if anybody begins to report a super spreader event from the Lakewood, Colorado area, at the end of Rocky Mountain Race Week, they had the award ceremony inside the tent that they used for NHRA stuff. So there had to be, 700 people crammed in this thing when they were doing the award ceremony. So I am hopeful that all of us who were not wearing masks, which I believe was 699, that we're all okay. I think we are, but it was kind of interesting because as a collective group, we all decided, screw this crap. We're going racing.
All right. Questions are about stalled out. Anyone else got anything? Nitrous cards to the front. Anything else?
Oh, please.
Oh, man.
I will.
So you're going to start shit for the post show, then.
No. NA will never start shit with anybody. Believe me. We pulled the Nitrous off for this event after seeing everybody in their cat with a clapped out Fairmont with a 5.3 and a single on it, running away from us. It's like, it's time to get a real power adder on my heap. I tell you what.
Is it going to have a bow tie on it?
No, it's not. It's going to be the same little bitty engine that it's always had, with just those little spinny things, like Scott's car.
Fine. Gosh. All right. Anything else? Apparently, with a John Bewley cam, with a foolproof cam, you can just weld the valve covers on. You don't got to check nothing. Thanks, Jared Tucker.
That's awesome. I want me one of them. We're not gonna get him to say anything, are we?
No.
General trans fluid recommendations. Yeah, Power Glide trans fluid recommendations. I've always used the Valvoline trans fluid stuff. I've been a big fan. I mean, it's kind of personal choice. It's whatever your builder tells you is the proper fluid for using with whatever he decides to build it with.
I like Type F.
I'm with you on the Type F.
Yep.
I'm with you on Type F.
Type F gives you almost all the performance of a full synthetic, and at like a tenth of the cost.
So that's an interesting point, Mark, because like ATI sells a full synthetic that is also Type F additive package performance. The stuff that I run from Hughes that's made for them by HPL is a full synthetic, but it has a Type F friction modifier package in it. So that's kind of interesting. One of my favorite things about this week is we had 0 transmission issues, temperature, anything, and we were doing our level best, towing 700 pounds of trailer, and well, my co-driver's not fat, but I am. So we added an even easy 1,200 pounds to the whole deal, and drove the car all over the place, and the transmission was just happy as a clam the whole time. So a little vote for the Hughes.
Something to remember is it's in a race car. Change it often. It's not something you leave in for 30,000, 40,000, 100,000 miles like you do in your daily driver. When you start beating on it at the track, you're putting a lot of heat into it and a lot of wear and tear into things. Change it often. It never hurts to have clean fluid.
Yeah, basically what they told me is the moment it loses color. Any change of color. Yeah. Sorry, Mike, I talked over you.
Oh, you're good. That's it. And then pour it in your daily driver afterwards. That's what we do. We take the oil that comes out of the race car and put it into our regular cars.
Did you say put it in a daily driver or an import?
No, I said it goes into our regular cars. Regular cars.
Ah, okay. I was just funning.
Yeah, might as well strain it through the dirt filter and put it in.
What do you think? Should we wrap it up?
I think we're there.
Chris Henderson says this is the best podcast ever. I'm just saying.
Where's Clark? He needs to turn it off.
He said he's listening.
Scott, push the off button, bro.
I'm listening. Are you ready for me to bring in some outro music or what? Everybody was still gabbing. I asked about it. Here it comes. Listen to that outro
Hey, by the
music.
way, Scott,
Good night.
if you didn't hear this, there were quite a number of people that came up to me and told me what a great time they had at your classes all over the country.
How wonderful.
And some hard-running guys, that were really killing it there, and they attributed it to your classes. So just
Nice.
know that.
Very good. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Okay. Well, I'll let you guys roll. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it tonight. It was a good time. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll be back next week, loud and proud. Until then, keep your head down and on a swivel. We'll talk to you guys soon. Have a good one.